Welcome, everyone. We've got about 15 folks today, which is good. Today, we are continuing our monthly Financing Philadelphia's Future, a live question and answer session with Councilmember Derek Green about public bank in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your moderator, Vanessa Lowe. I co-chair the Economic Dignity Team for Power, Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Build. And I host Vanessa's Money Hour on G-Town Radio. The usual, you'll be muted, but please do send your questions. We have a couple of folks who are going to be picking up those questions and asking them. But today, no other special guest than Councilmember Green. So I'm going to jump right in and sort of remind us where we were the last time we got together. We had just finished a wonderful summit. That summit was fantastic. People were still talking about it. Had lots of participation. I think at our height, 190 people, and 130 people still at the end. That was back when it was warm. Funny how that is. Then Councilmember Green was continuing to work with the attorneys to finalize the bill. I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Green.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. It's always a pleasure to be with all of you. This has been a very long process, longer for some than others. And I was just reflecting on when we first started this conversation with the initial conversation I had with some people on this call, where we started with an introduction and a resolution hearing to all the way to where we are now. Now, we have been working with our outside counsel, Holland and Knight, and as you may recall, some of the representatives from Holland Knight were recommended because they had an interest in this idea of public banking. So we have been meeting with them about once a week, along with representatives from the law department. And then we've had an internal meeting with the law department and representatives of the treasurer's office. In addition, I and some of the members of the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition have been meeting every other Monday to work on this legislation, kind of get us to where we are. Now, some of the challenges that we have been dealing with are based on one, the economic development finance law and how that is being opined by the law department and some of the challenges that presents. In addition, we've had multiple conversations with other entities, like, for example, the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities. And we've had some good conversations with them. They always gave us some perspective on certain challenges they would have if we use certain terms. But I think we have come to a perspective of how we can move forward with the goal of creating a municipal authority that we can use for the perspective of what we're talking about in reference to providing access to credit and other opportunities for those who are under or lesser banked, as well as the next step of applying for community development financial institution status or CDFI status. And the bill was drafted with guidance from those from Holland and Knight, and one attorney in particular, Carol Ward, used to work at the CDFI fund within the U.S. Treasury. And actually the head of that entity is someone I knew many years ago when I started my career at Meridian Bank. So we've had conversations with them, as well as the Federal Reserve. And then the third step would be to then use this entity that we are creating to get a bank charter. And in a conversation with the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, they stated that in order for us to get a bank charter, we would also have to get FDIC insurance, and we had some conversations with them. I've also had conversations with Richard Vague, who is the banking secretary as well. So the process of introducing the bill, getting the bill passed, working to get CDFI status, as well as working to become a entity chartered within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a bank charter is the path forward from my perspective to really form a public bank within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In the legislation, we included language that talks about some of our intentions in reference to creating a public bank. Now, we had to be very careful in reference to the drafting of this because there are definite entities, and I've talked with some and others to try to not have this legislation either preempted at the state level or have the Department of Banking and Securities take action against us before we even go to the process of applying for a bank charter. And they did state they'd be willing to work with us in that regard. The other challenge is in reference to having two different boards, one being a board that's appointed by the mayor, and it's a area of contention in reference to that issue because we want to make sure that both the corporate board and also the policy board can only be removed for cause. However, in the interpretation from the law department, that's solely in the power of the mayor. We have language in the bill that gives the perspective of the expectation of council, as well as certain requirements based on our original draft of the bill. It's my position that if the mayor signs this bill into law, and if the mayor does not follow the recommendations coming from council based on what we have articulated, then we would need to take any legal action if necessary, if the mayor or a future mayor decided to try to remove someone, and it was not for cause. So we're trying to finalize some of the language that gives the most protection in reference to the ability of appointees to serve based on the law department's interpretation and what we would like to have in reference to only appointments being removed for cause. We do have an upcoming meeting on Monday, December 6th at 4:30, where we'll follow up with the law department to see if we can come to some type of, I'll just say meeting of the mind in the reference to that issue. And then we plan to have the hearing on the bill on Monday, December 13th at 10 a.m. And that will give us an opportunity to, and I will be in the Finance Committee, which I chair. And the goal would be to get that bill out of committee with any additional amendments that we need to make. And we can do that between Thursday when the bill is introduced up through and prior to December 13th. The last session of council is December 16th. So the goal would be able to have the bill introduced on Thursday, work with the law department and with some of the representatives in this call on trying to come to a meeting of the minds on Monday, December 6th. If we need to provide additional amendments, to have those ready for the hearing on Monday, December 13th at 10 a.m. and then have the bill voted out of committee, have first reading on December 16th. And then we don't know right now the calendar dates for the next sessions of council in January. Once we do get that and receive that, and that will come from the council president's office, more likely in the next week or two. Then, and also hopefully we'll be in person in January when we resume council sessions. We can then work on what would be the best date to have the bill voted by the entire body of council and have people be able to testify in person in public comment in support of the bill. Now, that's all contingent upon the fact as we go into the latter part of December, early part of January, and if this new variant or Omicron variant does not become increasingly challenging, whether we'll be able to have council in person come January of 2021. So that's kind of the roadmap where I see where we are now with introduction on Thursday, another meeting between the law department and some of the representatives of this call on Monday, December 6th at 4:30. Then we also will continue to have conversation with Holland Knight and the law department. Those are scheduled every Tuesday and Thursday, but we've kind of, for the most part, wrapped up those conversations. I may want to have some of those parties be available for questions that may come up from members of council in the Finance Committee hearing on December 13th, and then hopefully have the bill voted out of committee and then have first read on the 16th with the goal of passage early part of next year. So that's kind of the roadmap of where we are. We've had a lot of conversations. There's been a lot of revisions, a lot of drafts, and a lot of moving parts. And there's also those who don't even want to see this bill introduced. I've had various individuals who've reached out to me that say there are existing entities that could do this type of work, that can do letters of credit or credit enhancements, and we don't need to create a new entity. But from my position, I don't see any of those entities willing to take a step of getting a bank charter for a municipal-owned entity that could at some point in the future receive deposits. And so that's why I think this entity is necessary, both from that perspective and also for the perspectives that we've discussed over the course of all the conversations we've had and based on the language that we've put into the bill.
All right, that was quite the update. As you said, you've been working very closely with the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition that's been working on this for years. So Peter Winslow is our Q&A person today. Peter, do you have any questions or do you want to share anything with us at this point?
Yes, Vanessa. Councilman Green, there are two boards, a governing board and a policy board. Can you explain for people who aren't familiar with this process, why there are two boards and instead of one?
So part of the challenge is that under the Economic Development Finance Law, it gives the power of the mayor to appoint a board. Also, under the Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI, you cannot have control by a government entity of that organization. So we're dealing with two entities that kind of are in conflict. So the idea was we have a board of directors that are appointed by the mayor with recommendations coming from council. That corporate board of 9 would then have the ability to appoint the policy board. And the policy board is really kind of like the lending entity that's going to do the review in reference to the products and other services that will come out of the public bank entity. Under the CDFI, that entity cannot be controlled by the public sector. And so that's why we had those two boards. We've also put in language that notwithstanding the executive director, no member of the board of directors can be on the policy board. We also put language into the legislation that the board of directors, if it so chooses in the future, may decide to have a different appointment process that may engage or have the ability for more democratic control of the policy board. Also, the policy board, they only can be removed for cause. The policy board also has the various listed requirements that we included in our initial draft for the board entity. And so that was the challenge that we dealt with for some time, these two different pieces of legislation, the Economic Development Finance Law, which had certain requirements, and then CDFI institution with also that certain requirements. And so that was the recommendation from the attorneys who were working with the Holland Knight as a way to achieve both goals. And then we made additional amendments to the language of the legislation to give the policy board, I think, some more independence and provide those opportunities and try to keep the goals of what we're trying to achieve, but still go within the rubric of the Economic Development Finance Law and also the requirement for a Community Development Financial Institution.
Kyra Harris is also with us. So Kyra, maybe raise your hand or let me know if you have any questions coming in on your end, okay?
Yes, we do have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the question comes from Tim Brown. How do we protect the sanctity of the board of directors from the next mayor? And in addition to that, why would they, I think this was the last statement that Councilmember Green made, why would they do that? What's their motivation to relinquish power?
Well, I'll go with the last question first. That was language that we put into the legislation that if the board of directors so choose, they could decide to have a more democratically controlled perspective reference policy board. There was conversation of having more community investment, community control, more democratic elected process. And that's something that the board of directors, if they so choose, could use for the policy board going forward. And that was something we tried to keep that concept within the legislation. In reference to your first point, that's been an issue that we're still trying to address to the best extent that we can, based on the economic development finance law and the opinion of the law department. And that's why we put in the perspective of the expectation of council in reference to the appointment power for the mayor, how long those appointments would last, the type of years of experience the individuals for the board of directors would have, as well as the recommendation coming from city council. Now, from my experience, in fact, we just had that literally today with the new Citizens Police Oversight Commission, where we actually had a committee, the whole hearing this morning, and there was a committee put together to select candidates for that, and that was done by Councilmember Jones, and that was based on the recommendation of that committee for the appointment of by the mayor. So historically, that has been the case, but I think if there became a situation where a mayor, a future mayor, he or she decided to remove someone from the board, I think we could make an argument from a legal perspective that that step by the mayor is in contravention of the legislation, because legislation includes what council expects, and also the fact that the mayor signed into law. And we will probably have a legal fight between the law department and administration if the mayor so choose. I would hope that would not be the case for a future mayor. But also I want to get people to realize that although we spent a lot of time drafting the legislation and getting to this point, we still have a lot more to go, especially in reference to, we've kind of articulated that based on the accelerator fund, that's why we had them come to our past conversation, as well as Philadelphia Green Capital Corporation. Both of those new entities started with about $1 million to $2 million in seed funding. We're going to need to lobby as part of the budget process to get that. In addition to the seed funding for the operations to give us some runway for at least 3 years, we're also going to have to identify the funds to capitalize this entity. And if we look at something like the recent Neighborhood Preservation Initiative legislation that was passed, that was $400 million. We issued about, the debt service was about $20 million on an annual basis for that $400 million bond. So if we're looking at 200 or 100 or 50 million, we're going to have to get the agreement of the administration to issue that type of debt and cover that type of debt service over the future years in order to capitalize the entity. Unless we're able to identify another source that more likely than not, we have to get the entities or individuals that oversee those other sources to support those use of dollars for this capitalization.
All right, Peter, back to you.
I see that Walt McCree has a question.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Derek. Your discussion of CDFI provisions and limitations made me think about could a workaround, an interim workaround prior to becoming a chartered entity perhaps be that you simply partner with CDFIs who are doing the front line without having to get a CDFI authorization yourself or get that in writing, and then just be able to use that as part of your channel for getting loans out. And might that relieve things?
I mean, that's definitely a possibility, but also remember, our goal is to become a bank charter and get a bank charter. So anything that we can show operations, and there's got to be a certain level of operations in order to even get the CDFI status. So I think each step gives us additional, I don't want to use the authority, but operational perspective. Sure. That I think will help us give us a better runway to get to bank chartered status, because we've now been operating as an entity that's similar to what a traditional bank would be. Yeah. But we still could partner, but that doesn't stop that does not create an inability for this entity to partner with other CDFIs in the very beginning. Also, the idea of this, and as I've been saying to those in CDFI community, that this is an entity that can lend to CDFIs. Because
Absolutely.
many community development financial institutions don't have a large balance sheet. They have some of the same issues that a co-op does, or a nonprofit housing developer that does not have a lot of assets, a lot of resources. So if that CDFI wanted to get access to more lending, they don't have a large balance sheet. So we could help mitigate some of that risk for that CDFI to get more access to credit from other entities as well.
Yeah.
That's why the whole concept of a banker's bank entity that can help CDFIs and others as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I came across that last night. Massachusetts is looking at our new state bank, and I want to share with this group a link to a presentation that was done by the Massachusetts Public Banking Group. Harvard economists wrote this really detailed description of how that bank would work, and something I think you would all enjoy reading, to look at how the CDFIs, for example, pay a lot of money for their money. They would love dearly to get it on a cheaper basis, and that the public bank, by nature of its operational efficiencies and resources, could certainly chime into that and create the really nice symbiosis between organizations. I'll put the link in the chat, and would recommend to all of you a chance to take a look at it, since you're
And thank you, Walt. Appreciate that. Two other quick points. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. I did not mention this earlier. In addition to the other entities we've worked with, we've also had a conversation with the Ethics Board. Mike Cook, who is their Director of Enforcement, has had an opportunity to provide some guidance. I've spoken in front of the Ethics Board. So one of the other reasons why we had to do a new bill is that in the title, we had to add language in reference to giving the Ethics Board the power to provide oversight to the boards and staff of this entity. And we had to include that in the title of the legislation. Also in this bill includes language that amends our Philadelphia Code in reference to the powers, and give those powers to the Ethics Board in reference to our board and staff. So that provides an additional level of oversight. That was one of the things that Ethics Boards was interested. They were concerned about how much additional resources this would demand, but this is similar to other entities that have provided that oversight, but also different because this is not an entity of the city. It's a municipal authority, so it's not directly a entity of the city of Philadelphia. And so that's why we had to amend the code to give the Ethics Board, which is an instrumentality of the city, the ability to provide that oversight. The other part I wanted to talk about, which we added, is that we added a section on annual meeting. And the annual meeting, kind of similar to what traditional corporations do with shareholders, but different from the perspective that at the annual meeting, the board will have to provide reports, including but not limited to financial performance regarding its activities. Those reports will also have to go to members of the city council. Also in the legislation, I borrowed from some of the language of city council in reference to how that annual meeting is advertised, at least 30 days notice. And we also included in that annual meeting section language in reference to the ability for public comment to give to the general public the ability to comment on the activities of this entity as well.
So I want to jump in here before and we're running out of time, but I want to capture something important that seems to have happened, which is that the legislation that was passed in January with 12 sponsors, the changes are significant enough that now it's a different bill. So do we have to start from scratch and getting new sponsors? How does that work?
Yes, so we have to get new sponsors. We reached out to various people to sponsor the bill, and we asked for people to sponsor the bill. One of the things that we had to do is when we sent the email out to members of the council before we finally circulated the bill, we informed people that, one, we had a new bill, we had to do a new bill because we wanted to add the ethics provisions. So that's why we had to do a new title. Now you can amend a bill at any time, but you can't amend the title. So the fact that we actually put the ethics language into this bill, which was not in the original draft, that means that we had to do a new bill, which would include a new title. Also, some of the other dynamics regarding the policy board and corporate board, which is also new, and that's based on conversations we had with Holland Knight. And also some of the other language in the bill was based on conversation with the Pennsylvania Department of Banking, the U.S. Treasury, as well as law department, as well as some of the conversations we've had with some various advocates. So the challenge is that, we started with a number of sponsors, and the fact that we don't have that same number of sponsors, I think creates more challenges for us, because like I said, there are those who I know have already reached out to some of my colleagues and have asked about the bill. So going from a large number of sponsors to a much smaller number of sponsors, even though this is the bill that was drafted based on a lot of the work we put in, is not helpful. And so in getting additional council members to support this, because there are going to be those who are going to say to the administration, they're going to say to other council members, you should not support this. We already have other entities that can do this. We don't need to have a city to have any type of public entity like a public bank. City deposits should stay where they are, and we don't need this. And so the fact that and I'll check with Frank to see what our final count of co-sponsors are, but the fact that it's gone from 12 to any lesser number does not help, and it will make the job harder to get this passed.
Okay.
Vanessa, I noticed that Stan has a question.
Okay, Stan, we have 3 minutes left and I need at least 2 for an announcement apparently. Go ahead, Stan.
I just want to quickly put on the record, my deep appreciation for all the work that the council member has done in coalition with us, but that we do have a concern with the process for appointment of the corporate board, and the fact that the bill merely states that it is the expectation of council that certain procedures will be followed, where some of us are just very skeptical that the mayor will indeed follow those procedures, which could mean that this is a kind of a captive of some of the usual forces that really aren't interested in the mission of the bank. So I just want to put that on the record as an issue that we've got to work through.
Right. And totally understand that concern. It has not been my experience that the administration has gone against the desires of council and relevant legislation. I can see that more of a future concern. If a future mayor decides that I don't like this person, so I'm going to remove them from this board, I think in the initial appointment process, we'll be able to get what we need to get done. There's more of a future mayor if she or he decides to remove someone not for cause. And I think that will give us opportunity, if need be, a future group to litigate this issue, and they can use the expectation of council as a legislative intent, and that the mayor, as signing the bill, agreed in writing to file the expectation of council and to only remove and appoint people based on the wishes of the legislation.
All right, once again, we've run out of time, so short. Tim Brown is going to, I think you've got a slide with some announcements, Tim. Thank you all for joining us. We'll continue having these as we go forward.